I don't care what his boarding pass says. Remove that passenger from my aircraft immediately, or this plane stays grounded. Captain Derek Matthews's voice cut through the first-class cabin of Skyward Airlines Flight 318 like a blade. Every conversation stopped. Every newspaper lowered. Every phone paused mid-scroll. The morning calm of Boston Logan Airport suddenly felt electric with tension. He stood in the aisle, silver hair, perfectly styled, jaw set with absolute authority. His captain's uniform bore the 4 gold stripes of a senior pilot, a man who'd commanded aircraft for 28 years. But right now, he wasn't looking like a professional aviator. He looked like a man consumed by something darker. His accusing finger pointed directly at seat 2A, at Marcus Thompson. Marcus sat quietly, one leg crossed over the other, reading what appeared to be a technical manual. He wore simple khaki pants and a navy polo shirt. No designer labels, no flashy watch, no expensive briefcase. Just a man in his mid-40s with calm eyes and steady hands absorbed in his reading. He was black. And Captain Derek Matthews had a problem with that. I will not have someone like him sitting behind me. Matthews continued, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that brooked no argument. He's a security risk, and frankly, he doesn't belong in this cabin. The gasps were audible. Phones came out instantly. The tension didn't just fill the air, it seemed to suck all the oxygen from the cabin. But what Captain Derek Matthews didn't know was that the man he was demanding to remove wasn't just any passenger. He wasn't a construction worker who'd gotten lucky with an upgrade. He wasn't someone trying to scam his way into first class. He was the one man with the power to end Matthews' entire career with a single phone call. And the federal badge hidden in his jacket pocket was about to turn the captain's world completely upside down. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Boston Logan International Airport. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of jet fuel and possibility. Terminal A buzzed with the usual pre-dawn energy of business travelers catching early flights to important meetings. Flight 318 to Miami sat at Gate 12, a Boeing 737 that had made this route hundreds of times before. The first-class cabin smelled of rich leather and freshly brewed coffee, a sanctuary for those who could afford the premium price tag. Marcus Thompson had arrived at the gate early, as was his habit. He'd checked in online, chosen his seat carefully, and boarded during the priority process without fanfare. He carried a single piece of luggage, a weathered leather briefcase that had seen years of travel and a thick manual tucked under his arm. To the casual observer, Marcus looked like middle management, maybe a regional sales director or a mid-level consultant. His clothes were neat but unremarkable. His posture was confident but not commanding. He had the kind of presence that blended into crowds, which was exactly what he wanted. He settled into seat 2A and opened his manual Federal Aviation Regulations, Passenger Rights, and Carrier Obligations. He'd read it dozens of times before, but today it wasn't for study. Today, it was for reference. The boarding process continued smoothly. Business travelers filled the premium cabin, settling into their oversized seats with the practiced ease of frequent flyers. Isabella Rodriguez, the lead flight attendant, moved through her pre-flight routine with professional efficiency. At 29, she'd been with Skyward Airlines for 8 years, working her way up from domestic routes to international flights. Isabella was Latina, born in El Salvador, but raised in Boston. She knew what it meant to work twice as hard for half the recognition. She'd seen discrimination in all its forms, both subtle and overt. But she'd also learned to navigate corporate politics to keep her head down and her opinions to herself. She had a mortgage to pay and a mother to support. The other passengers in first class represented the usual mix of wealth and privilege. In seat 1A sat Emma Sullivan, a tech executive in her 30s who'd built a corporate accountability software company from nothing. She had 500,000 social media followers and wasn't afraid to use her platform when she witnessed injustice. Seat 2B belonged to Richard Hawthorne, a hedge fund manager who treated flight attendants like servants and fellow passengers like inconveniences. He was the kind of man who believed money bought him the right to look down on others. Dr. David Park occupied seat 3A. A surgeon returning from a medical conference in Boston, he was quiet, observant, and possessed of the kind of moral clarity that comes from holding lives in your hands. In seat 1C, elderly Mrs. Eleanor Foster clutched her purse and tried to mind her own business. At 78, she'd seen enough of the world to recognize trouble when she smelled it. The junior flight attendant, Katie Williams, was 24 and idealistic. Fresh out of training, she still believed that airline policies existed to protect everyone equally. She looked up to Isabella as a mentor and tried to model her professional demeanor. Everything seemed routine. Everything seemed normal. Until Captain Derek Matthews emerged from the cockpit for his traditional first-class greeting. Matthews was the poster boy for Skyward Airlines' old guard. At 52, he represented everything the company wanted to project: experience, authority, competence. His silver hair was styled to perfection. His jawline could have been carved from granite. His uniform was pressed to military precision. He'd flown for 28 years, starting with regional carriers before working his way up to major airline captain. He'd survived mergers, downturns, and industry upheavals. He was a senior pilot, a Czech airman, and he let everyone know it. Matthews believed the sky belonged to him personally. He began his usual pre-flight ritual, working his way through the first-class cabin with practiced charm. He shook hands with Richard Hawthorne. "Good to see you again, Mr. Hawthorne. Smooth skies today." He winked at Emma Sullivan. "Ms. Sullivan, always a pleasure to have you aboard." Then he turned toward seat 2A. His smile vanished instantly. He looked at Marcus Thompson, then at the empty seat beside him, then back at Marcus. His eyes narrowed, taking in the casual clothes, the dark skin, the quiet demeanor, reading what looked like a technical manual. To Matthews, Marcus didn't look like a CEO or a diplomat. He didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. He looked like what Matthews privately called a mistake. Isabella Matthews snapped, not bothering to lower his voice. Isabella Rodriguez hurried over from the galley, her professional smile intact, but her eyes wary. She'd worked with Matthews before. She knew his moods. "Yes, Captain. Why is maintenance crew sitting in first class?" The cabin went dead silent. The hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to fade away, replaced by a sudden heavy tension that pressed against everyone's eardrums. Conversations didn't just stop, they died mid-sentence. Marcus Thompson didn't look up from his manual. His jaw tightened once, almost imperceptibly. His fingers gripped the pages just a fraction tighter, but his voice remained steady, his posture unchanged. Isabella flushed pink. "Captain, that's Mr. Thompson. He's a passenger." Seat 2A. Matthews scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that seemed to echo off the cabin walls. He stepped closer to Marcus, using his height and uniform to intimidate. "Let me see your ticket." Marcus slowly lowered his manual. He looked up, meeting Matthews' arrogant gaze with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than any outburst could have been. "I've already shown my ticket to the gate agent and the flight attendant captain. Is there a problem with the aircraft?" The question was perfectly reasonable. The tone was respectful. The words were chosen with precision. But Matthews heard something else entirely. "The problem," Matthews said, leaning in, so his voice dropped to a venomous whisper that somehow carried across the entire silent cabin, "is that I don't like liars. And I don't like people trying to game the upgrade. There is no way you purchased this seat legitimately." He straightened up, his voice returning to normal volume but losing none of its venom. "Did you use a stolen credit card? Employee fraud? Some kind of scam I haven't seen before?" Marcus closed his manual, carefully marking his place with deliberate precision. "I paid for my ticket the same as everyone else, Captain. I suggest you return to the cockpit. You're already 10 minutes behind schedule for pushback." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. No one spoke to Captain Derek Matthews like that. Not on his aircraft. Not ever. His face turned a deep shade of crimson that clashed with his silver hair. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. His voice, when it came, was low and dangerous. "Don't you tell me my schedule, boy." The word hung in the air like a slap. Boy. Not sir, not passenger, not even hey you, boy. A racial slur wrapped in false politeness. A word designed to diminish, to dehumanize, to put someone in their place. Emma Sullivan's hand moved to her phone. Dr. Park set down his newspaper. Mrs. Foster's knuckles went white on her purse handle. Richard Hawthorne leaned forward with interest, clearly entertained by the developing confrontation. Isabella Rodriguez felt something die in her stomach. She'd heard that tone before. She'd seen that look before. She knew exactly what was happening, and she knew she was powerless to stop it. But Marcus Thompson simply nodded once, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. "Is that so?" he asked quietly. Matthews stepped even closer now, towering over the seated man. "I am the captain of this vessel. Under federal law, I have the right to remove any passenger I deem a security risk or a disturbance. And right now, your presence here looking like you just walked off a construction site is disturbing me." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with the kind of deliberate calm that suggested he'd done this before. He pulled out his phone. One quick glance at the screen. One brief text message sent. Protocol 7. Status active. He put the phone away and looked back up at Captain Matthews. "You have exactly 12 minutes to return to your cockpit, Captain, before this situation becomes irreversible." Matthews laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Irreversible? You think you can threaten me?" Marcus smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who knew something that no one else in the cabin knew. Something that would change everything. The clock had started ticking. Captain Derek Matthews had 12 minutes left in his career. He just didn't know it yet. Marcus Thompson closed his eyes for just a moment, and 23 years vanished like morning mist. He was 22 years old again, standing in the lobby of the Meridian Hotel in downtown Atlanta. He'd just finished his first deployment in Afghanistan, finally home after 8 months of flying transport missions through some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. He wore his dress blues, his chest decorated with ribbons he'd earned through courage and skill. He'd booked the Meridian to celebrate. His girlfriend Sarah had agreed to marry him, and he wanted their engagement dinner to be perfect. He'd saved for months to afford the suite, the champagne, the ring. The desk clerk looked him up and down and said, "I'm sorry, but soldiers don't stay here. You might try the Holiday Inn down the street." Marcus had stood there, wallet open, credit card in hand, reservation confirmation printed out, while a lobby full of people watched him be humiliated for wearing the uniform of his country. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked away. But that night, sitting in the Holiday Inn's cramped room with Sarah beside him, he'd made a promise to himself. He would never again be in a position where someone could dismiss him because of how he looked. He would climb as high as necessary to ensure that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else. 23 years later, that promise had shaped everything he'd become. After his military service, 12 years as an Air Force transport pilot, including tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Marcus had joined the Federal Aviation Administration. He'd started as a junior safety inspector, working his way through the ranks with the same methodical determination that had made him an exceptional pilot. He specialized in passenger rights violations, discrimination cases, and corporate accountability. He was the inspector airlines feared most because he didn't announce his audits. He didn't give warnings. He simply showed up, observed, and documented. Over 15 years with the FAA, he'd investigated hundreds of cases. He'd seen discrimination in every form: passengers denied boarding because of their names, families separated because of their accents, individuals humiliated because of their appearance. But he'd also seen change, real measurable change. Airlines that had reformed their practices, flight crews that had learned to see passengers as people rather than problems, corporate cultures that had been forced to evolve. Marcus was now a senior federal aviation safety inspector for the Northeast region, with authority over every commercial flight operating in 9 states. His badge carried the full weight of federal law. His recommendations could ground airlines, revoke licenses, and trigger Department of Justice investigations. He was 45 years old, a widower raising a teenage daughter named Zoe. His wife, Sarah, the same Sarah from that hotel lobby 23 years ago, had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Zoe was now 17, a senior in high school with plans to study law. She'd inherited her mother's fierce sense of justice and her father's quiet strength. "Dad," she'd said just last week, "I want to do what you do. I want to make sure the system works for everyone, not just people who look the right way." That conversation was why Marcus was on Flight 318 today. Skyward Airlines had received 47 formal complaints in the past 18 months regarding discriminatory treatment of minority passengers. 23 of those complaints specifically mentioned first-class discrimination. 8 complaints had specifically named Captain Derek Matthews, but complaints were just paperwork. Matthews was protected by his union, his seniority, and his clean flying record. Previous investigations had been stonewalled by airline management who preferred to settle cases quietly rather than admit fault. So Marcus had designed a different kind of investigation. No advance notice, no corporate liaison, no official protocols. Just a federal inspector dressed like an ordinary passenger carrying legitimate documentation flying in a seat he'd paid for with his own credit card. A test of whether Captain Matthews would treat a black passenger in first class with basic human dignity. The test was not going well. Captain Derek Matthews, meanwhile, was reliving his own moment of reckoning. It was 1995. He was a young first officer with Regional Express Airlines flying routes between small towns across New England. He'd grown up in Brookline, Massachusetts, in a house where casual racism was as common as morning coffee. His father had been a police officer who spoke openly about those people. His mother had been a bank manager who'd found creative ways to deny loans to minority applicants. Matthews had absorbed their attitudes like a sponge absorbs water. Quietly, unconsciously, completely. That year, Regional Express had hired its first black pilot, a former Navy aviator named James Washington. Washington was better trained than Matthews, more experienced, and significantly more professional. He should have been promoted to captain first. But Matthews had friends in management. He had family connections. He had the benefit of looking the part. Washington was passed over 3 times for promotion. Matthews was made captain on his first review. Washington eventually left Regional Express. Matthews heard later that he'd filed a discrimination lawsuit, but nothing came of it. The airline had settled quietly, and Washington had disappeared into private charter aviation. Matthews never thought about James Washington anymore. He'd convinced himself that he'd earned his promotion through merit, that race had nothing to do with anything. He'd built a successful career on that foundation of willful blindness. 28 years later, he was one of Skyward Airlines' most senior captains. He flew international routes, commanded respect from younger pilots, and enjoyed the prestige that came with the position. But underneath the professional exterior, the same assumptions that had shaped his childhood remained unchanged. He still believed there was a natural order to things. He still believed that certain types of people belonged in certain places. And Marcus Thompson in his khaki pants and polo shirt didn't belong in first class. Matthews had questioned minority passengers before, always carefully, always with plausible deniability. A request to see additional identification. a suggestion that they might be more comfortable in economy, a friendly recommendation to double-check their seat assignments. He'd never been confronted. He'd never been challenged. He'd never faced consequences. Until today. Isabella Rodriguez watched the confrontation unfold with a familiar, sick feeling in her stomach. She'd witnessed this before, not just with Captain Matthews, but with other crew members, who believed their authority extended beyond safety and into social hierarchy. Isabella had been born in El Salvador, but came to the United States when she was 5. Her family had fled civil war, carrying nothing but hope and determination. Her parents had worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Her mother cleaned office buildings at night. Her father washed dishes in restaurant kitchens. Isabella had put herself through college, earned a degree in hospitality management, and joined Skyward Airlines with dreams of becoming a corporate trainer. She wanted to help create a more inclusive airline industry where passengers were judged by their ticket class, not their skin color. But 8 years with the airline had taught her harsh lessons about institutional power structures. Complaints about discrimination were often buried in paperwork. Witnesses were discouraged from speaking up. Flight attendants who challenged problematic behavior found themselves assigned to less desirable routes. Isabella had learned to survive by staying quiet, keeping her head down and focusing on providing excellent service to all passengers equally. She couldn't change the airline's culture, but she could control her own actions. Now she was watching Captain Matthews cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and she was paralyzed by the impossible choice between job security and moral obligation. Emma Sullivan, meanwhile, was experiencing her own moment of recognition. At 34, Emma had built a successful technology company that specialized in corporate accountability software. Her platforms helped companies track and address discrimination in hiring, promotion, and customer service. She'd testified before Congress about algorithmic bias and had spoken at dozens of conferences about the intersection of technology and social justice. But she'd never witnessed blatant discrimination happening in real time right in front of her. Emma had 547,000 followers across social media platforms. She understood the power of documentation, the importance of witnesses, and the potential for viral content to drive real change. Her finger hovered over the live button on her phone. Dr. David Park sat in seat 3A, watching the confrontation with the analytical mind of a surgeon. At 41, he'd spent his career making split-second decisions under pressure. He understood the importance of precise observation and accurate documentation. As a Korean-American, Dr. Park had faced his own share of discrimination in the medical field. Patients who'd asked for a real American doctor. Colleagues who'd assumed he was a medical student rather than an attending physician. Department heads who'd consistently overlooked him for leadership positions. He'd learned to document everything, every slight, every bias, every institutional barrier, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. In medicine, as in life, the truth was often obscured by those in power. Now he was watching a federal case unfold in real time, and his training kicked in. He began taking detailed notes. Richard Hawthorne represented everything wrong with privilege in America. The 50-year-old hedge fund manager had inherited his father's investment firm and his grandfather's sense of entitlement. He genuinely believed that wealth made him superior to those who had less. He'd never faced real consequences for his behavior, never been held accountable for his attitudes, never been forced to examine his own biases. He lived in a bubble of assumed superiority, surrounded by people who enabled his worst impulses. To Hawthorne, the confrontation between Matthews and Marcus was entertainment, a chance to watch someone be put in their place. He had no idea that he was about to become a documented example of bystander complicity and discrimination. Mrs. Eleanor Foster was 78 years old and had lived through the civil rights era. She'd seen lynchings on television, watched integration battles play out in schools and restaurants, witnessed both the worst and best of American humanity. She'd raised 4 children to judge people by their character rather than their appearance. She'd volunteered with civil rights organizations in the 1960s. She'd donated to scholarships for minority students. But she'd also learned to keep quiet when confronted with discrimination in public spaces. Too many times she'd seen people who spoke up face retaliation, harassment, or worse. So she'd developed the habit of bearing witness silently, of remembering what she saw, of carrying the truth even when she couldn't speak it. Now, at 78, she was watching history repeat itself in the first-class cabin of a commercial airliner. Katie Williams was 24 years old and still believed the world was fundamentally fair. She'd graduated from college with a degree in hospitality management and joined Skyward Airlines because she wanted to help people travel safely and comfortably. Her training had covered passenger rights, anti-discrimination policies, and conflict resolution. She'd memorized the employee handbook, practiced de-escalation techniques, and promised herself she would always stand up for what was right. But theory was different from reality. Policy was different from practice. And watching Captain Matthews systematically humiliate a passenger was forcing her to confront the gap between what she'd been taught and what she was witnessing. Marcus Thompson sat quietly in seat 2A, reading his Federal Aviation Regulations manual, while around him the various passengers and crew members wrestled with their own moments of truth. He'd conducted hundreds of these audits over his 15-year career. He knew how they typically unfolded. The pattern was always the same: assumption, escalation, discrimination, and then, when confronted with authority, desperate backtracking. But this audit felt different, more personal, more charged. Maybe it was because of his conversation with Zoe the week before. Maybe it was because of the sheer blatancy of Matthews' behavior. Maybe it was because he was tired of seeing the same patterns repeat themselves year after year. Or maybe it was because he could still remember standing in that hotel lobby 23 years ago, feeling small and powerless while people watched him be humiliated. Today, he wasn't powerless. Today, he carried the full authority of the federal government. Today, he could do more than just walk away. He checked his phone. Protocol 7 was now active. His entire team was monitoring the situation in real time. Audio and video recording had begun. Legal support was standing by. Captain Derek Matthews had 11 minutes left in his career. The countdown continued. Captain Matthews returned to the cockpit, but not to prepare for departure. Through the small window in the cockpit door, passengers could see him on the radio. His gestures animated, his face flushed with anger. Isabella Rodriguez moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and stowing carry-on bags, but her movements were mechanical. Her mind was entirely focused on the growing tension that seemed to press against the cabin walls like atmospheric pressure. Emma Sullivan had made her decision. Her finger tapped the live button on her phone, and immediately her followers began joining the stream. Within 30 seconds, she had 50 viewers. Within 2 minutes, she had 500. "I'm on Flight 318 from Boston to Miami," she whispered into her phone, angling the camera to capture seat 2A, where Marcus Thompson continued reading his manual. "And I'm witnessing what appears to be racial discrimination by the captain against a first-class passenger." The comments began immediately. "Are you serious? Call the airline? This is 2024. How is this still happening? Record everything." Marcus noticed. The phone pointed in his direction but didn't react. He'd seen this pattern before. In the age of social media, discrimination rarely happened without documentation. The question wasn't whether it would be recorded, but whether the recording would be enough to drive real change. Captain Matthews emerged from the cockpit with a tablet in his hand and steel in his eyes. He'd made his decision. He would not be questioned. He would not be challenged, and he would not allow his authority to be undermined by anyone, regardless of their skin color. "Isabella," he called out, his voice carrying the full weight of his position. "I need to speak with you immediately." Isabella hurried over, her professional smile strained. "Yes, Captain. I want a complete verification of Seat 2A's documentation. Full background check through airline security. Cross-reference his credit card with the passenger manifest. I want to know how he really got that seat." Isabella glanced toward Marcus, who appeared to be absorbed in his reading. Sir, his documents have already been verified at the gate. His credit card authorized properly. His frequent flyer. I don't care what the computer says, Matthews interrupted. Computers can be fooled. Credit cards can be stolen. I want manual verification from airline security. Emma Sullivan's live stream viewers had grown to over 3,000. The comments were coming too fast to read, but the sentiment was clear. Outrage, disbelief, and demands for accountability. The captain is now demanding additional verification of the passenger's documents, Emma narrated quietly. The passenger has done nothing except sit quietly and read. This is pure racial profiling happening in real time. Dr. Park had moved from taking notes to recording audio on his phone. As a medical professional, he understood the importance of creating an unimpeachable record. Whatever was happening here would likely end up in court, and accuracy would be crucial. Richard Hawthorne was enjoying the show. He leaned back in his seat, sipping his complimentary champagne, watching Matthews assert his authority. In Hawthorne's worldview, this was how things should work. People should know their place, should accept their position in the social hierarchy, should defer to their betters. About time someone checks these people, he muttered just loud enough for his seatmates to hear. Mrs. Foster's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. She'd seen this before decades ago, but the pain of recognition was fresh. The casual cruelty, the institutional power used as a weapon, the way decent people stayed silent while someone was methodically dehumanized. Katie Williams approached Isabella hesitantly. What's happening? Why is the captain so upset? Isabella's voice was tight with strain. He wants additional verification of Mr. Thompson's documents. But why? He hasn't done anything wrong. Keep your voice down, Isabella whispered. Just do your job. But Katie was young enough to still believe that doing her job meant protecting passengers from discrimination, not enabling it. She looked toward seat 2A, where Marcus Thompson continued reading as if nothing was happening around him. Matthews returned to Marcus with tablet in hand, flanked by Isabella like she was his backup. His approach was theatrical, designed to intimidate and humiliate. Sir, he said, his voice loud enough to ensure the entire first-class cabin could hear. I need to verify your identity and payment method. Please present your driver's license, credit card, and any additional identification you may have. Marcus slowly lowered his manual and looked up at Matthews. His expression was perfectly calm, but something had shifted in his eyes, a coldness that hadn't been there before. Captain, I've already provided the required identification to your airline's representatives. My documentation has been verified and accepted. Is there a specific safety concern that requires additional verification? The question was perfectly reasonable, professionally phrased, and completely devastating in its implications. By asking about safety concerns, Marcus was forcing Matthews to justify his demands in terms of aviation security, rather than personal prejudice. Matthews felt the ground shifting beneath him, but he was too committed to back down now. I have concerns about the authenticity of your documents. Present your identification immediately, or I'll call airport security to remove you from this aircraft. Emma Sullivan's live stream now had 8,000 viewers. She zoomed in on Matthew's face, capturing every expression, every gesture, every word. The captain is now threatening to have airport security remove a passenger who has committed no crime except being black in first class, she narrated. This is exactly the kind of discrimination that drives people away from air travel. Marcus reached into his wallet and calmly produced his driver's license and credit card. He handed them to Matthews without comment, his movements deliberate and controlled. Matthews examined the documents with theatrical intensity, turning them over, holding them up to the light, comparing the photo to Marcus's face multiple times. This could be fraudulent, he announced to the cabin. These days anyone can fake an ID. Isabella, call airline security. I want these documents verified through multiple databases. The cabin erupted in whispers. Other passengers were now openly staring, their conversations forgotten. The delay was becoming impossible to ignore. Dr. Park stood up. As a surgeon, he was accustomed to speaking with authority in crisis situations. Captain, as a medical professional, I've reviewed many identification documents. Those appear to be legitimate government-issued credentials. What specific indicators suggest fraud? Matthews whipped around to face him. Sit down, Doctor. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does, Dr. Park replied calmly. I'm a passenger on this aircraft, and I'm witnessing what appears to be discriminatory treatment. As a citizen, I have both the right and the obligation to observe and document potential civil rights violations. Emma Sullivan's live stream exploded with comments. Her viewer count had jumped to over 15,000 as word spread across social media platforms. The captain just told a doctor to sit down for questioning potential discrimination, she narrated. Other passengers are now getting involved. This is escalating quickly. Marcus watched the interaction with growing interest. He'd designed the audit to test Matthew's response to a single black passenger, but it was becoming clear that the captain's bias extended far beyond racial profiling. Matthews was exhibiting a pattern of authoritarian behavior that suggested deeper problems with impulse control and respect for passenger rights. Isabella returned from the galley with a phone, her hands shaking slightly. Captain, I have airline security on the line. Matthews grabbed the phone. This is Captain Matthews on Flight 318. I need immediate verification of passenger documents. Seat 2A. Possible fraudulent identification and credit card theft. He listened for a moment, then held out the phone toward Marcus. Security wants to speak with you. Marcus took the phone calmly. This is Marcus Thompson. How can I help you? The conversation was brief and professional. Marcus provided his social security number, answered basic identity verification questions, and confirmed his credit card's security code. Then he handed the phone back to Matthews. Matthews listened to the security officer's response, his face growing progressively redder. Are you sure double-checked the credit card authorization? What do you mean no flags? Run it through the fraud database again. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Matthews becoming increasingly agitated as security confirmed that all of Marcus's documentation was legitimate, his credit card was valid, and his identity was verified. Finally, Matthews hung up the phone and glared at Marcus. They say everything checks out, but I'm not convinced. Something doesn't add up here. Dr. Park spoke up again. Captain, what exactly doesn't add up? His identification is valid, his credit card is legitimate, and his ticket was properly purchased. What additional verification do you require? I require, Matthews said through gritted teeth, passengers who belong in first class to actually belong in first class, not people trying to game the upgrade or scam their way into premium seating. The cabin fell completely silent. The accusation was now explicit. Marcus Thompson didn't belong in first class because of how he looked, how he dressed, and ultimately because of who he was. Emma Sullivan's live stream had reached 25,000 viewers. The hashtag Skyward Discrimination was beginning to trend on social media. News outlets were starting to pick up the story. The captain has now explicitly stated that he believes this passenger doesn't belong in first class, Emma narrated. Despite valid documentation, proper payment, and no misconduct whatsoever. This is discrimination, pure and simple. Marcus closed his manual and set it carefully on his lap. When he looked up at Matthews, his expression had changed. The calm was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Something that suggested the test had been completed and found wanting. Captain Matthews, he said quietly, you have made a serious mistake. Matthews laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. A mistake. The mistake would be letting you sit in a seat you haven't earned. Actually, Marcus replied, reaching into his jacket pocket. The mistake was assuming you knew who you were talking to. His hand emerged holding a slim black wallet. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and held it up so Matthews could see the contents. Inside was a gold badge that caught the cabin lighting and threw it back like a mirror. Below the badge, clearly visible, was an identification card that read, Marcus Thompson, Senior Inspector, Federal Aviation Administration. The color drained from Captain Matthews' face like water through a broken dam. Emma Sullivan's live stream exploded. "Oh my God," she whispered into her phone. "He's FAA. He's a federal inspector. The captain just discriminated against a federal aviation inspector." Her viewer count jumped to 50,000 in seconds. Dr. Park lowered his phone, his audio recording now capturing the most important moment. "Well," he said quietly, "this just became a federal case." Marcus Thompson stood up slowly, his federal credentials still visible in his hand. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality than before. Not louder, but deeper. Not angry, but absolutely authoritative. "Captain Derek Matthews, badge number 4738. You are currently under Federal Aviation Safety Audit for passenger rights compliance. This interaction has been recorded and documented. You have just failed that audit in the most spectacular manner possible." Matthews staggered backward as if physically struck. This can't be happening. You can't be." "I can, and I am," Marcus replied. "Senior Federal Aviation Safety Inspector Marcus Thompson, Northeast Region. I've been conducting an unannounced compliance audit of Skyward Airlines passenger treatment protocols." He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with each witness. "And what I've observed here today represents the most blatant violation of federal passenger rights regulations I've encountered in 15 years of conducting these audits." The cabin was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system and the frantic typing of Emma Sullivan's followers commenting on her live stream. Matthews' career was over and everyone in the cabin knew it. But the real reckoning was just beginning. The silence that followed Marcus's revelation lasted exactly 11 seconds. Dr. Park timed it on his phone, a detail that would later be included in federal investigation reports, congressional testimony, and civil rights case studies. 11 seconds where Captain Derek Matthews' entire worldview collapsed and rebuilt itself around a single terrible truth: he had just discriminated against a federal inspector with the power to destroy his career. When the silence broke, it was Matthews who shattered it. "This is impossible," he stammered, taking a step backward. "Federal inspectors don't dress like, they don't look like, you can't be." Marcus Thompson held his badge steady, letting the gold catch the cabin light. "Like what Captain Federal Inspectors don't look like." "What?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the cabin, phones were recording, passengers were watching, and social media was exploding with real-time coverage of a federal aviation safety audit gone catastrophically wrong for the airline. Emma Sullivan's live stream had reached 90,000 viewers. The comments were coming too fast to read, but she caught fragments. "This is insane. Captain is about to be destroyed. Federal inspector just played the ultimate reverse card, RIP to this pilot's career." Isabella Rodriguez stood frozen between her loyalty to the airline and her growing realization that she was witnessing history. 8 years of keeping her head down, of navigating corporate politics, of staying silent in the face of discrimination, all of it was crashing down around her as she watched a federal inspector methodically document her captain's bias. Katie Williams, the junior flight attendant, felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of how power worked. She'd been trained to see the captain as the ultimate authority on the aircraft, the final word on all decisions. But now she was watching that authority crumble under the weight of federal oversight. Dr. Park continued his audio recording while simultaneously taking detailed notes. As a surgeon, he was trained to document critical events with precision. What he was witnessing would likely become evidence in multiple investigations, and accuracy would be crucial. Richard Hawthorne had stopped smiling. The hedge fund manager was beginning to realize that his earlier comments supporting the captain had been recorded and were now part of a federal investigation. His entertainment was rapidly becoming his potential liability. Mrs. Foster clutched her purse and remembered other moments like this one. moments when authority figures who seemed untouchable suddenly discovered they were very touchable indeed. She'd lived through the civil rights era, through integration battles, through the slow, painful progress of American justice. This felt like another of those watershed moments. Marcus reached into his briefcase and produced a tablet computer. His movements were calm, methodical, professional. "Captain Matthews, I'm now going to read you the specific violations I've observed during this audit." He looked down at his screen, then back up at Matthews. Violation 1. Racial profiling of passenger in violation of Department of Transportation Regulations Section 382. 7. Regarding non-discrimination in air travel. Matthews' mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't mean, it wasn't about race. Violation 2. Marcus continued without pausing. Harassment of passenger in violation of federal passenger rights protections under 14 CFR Part 250. I was conducting a security check. Matthews protested. Violation 3. Abuse of captain's authority to intimidate passenger based on racial characteristics in violation of Civil Rights Act provisions regarding public accommodations. Emma Sullivan's live stream viewer count hit 150,000. News outlets were now actively monitoring the stream. The hashtag Federal Inspector Disrespected was trending nationwide. He's reading the violations like a federal indictment, Emma narrated quietly. This captain just went from authority figure to defendant in real time. Marcus continued reading from his tablet. Violation 4. Creating hostile environment for passenger based on protected characteristics in violation of both federal regulations and airline industry standards. Now wait just a minute, Matthews said, his voice cracking. You didn't identify yourself as federal law enforcement. You're required to. Actually, Captain, I'm not. Marcus looked up from his tablet with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. Federal aviation inspectors conducting compliance audits are specifically not required to identify themselves during the observation period. The entire purpose is to evaluate normal operating procedures. He gestured around the cabin. And your normal operating procedures, Captain, appear to include systematic discrimination against minority passengers in first class. Dr. Park raised his hand slightly. Inspector Thompson, as a witness to these events, I can confirm that Captain Matthews demonstrated clear racial bias. His initial assumption was that a black passenger in first class must be committing fraud. Thank you, Dr. Park, Marcus replied. Your witness statement will be included in my report. Isabella Rodriguez finally found her voice. Inspector Thompson, I want to state for the record that Mr. Thompson's documentation was properly verified at the gate and by our crew. There was never any legitimate reason to question his presence in first class. Matthews whipped around to stare at Isabella. What are you doing? You're my crew. I'm a professional flight attendant, Isabella replied, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. And I witnessed discrimination. I have an obligation to report what I saw. Katie Williams stepped forward. I also witnessed the discrimination. Captain Matthews made assumptions based on appearance and race. I've never seen anything like this in my training. Matthews looked around the cabin, desperately seeking support, finding only witnesses to his downfall. This is insane! I'm the captain! I have authority on this aircraft! Marcus closed his tablet and looked directly at Matthews. Captain, your authority extends to aviation safety, not to civil rights violations. And what you've demonstrated here has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with prejudice. He stood up, his federal credentials still visible. I'm now going to inform you of the immediate consequences of your actions. Matthews's face had gone completely white. Consequences? First, Marcus said, consulting his tablet again. I'm recommending immediate suspension of your pilot's license pending full federal investigation. You can't do that. I can, and I am. Second, I'm filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division regarding violation of federal passenger rights. This is a misunderstanding. You can resolve this quietly, can't you? I mean, no real harm was done." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Captain, you attempted to have a paying passenger removed from an aircraft based solely on his race. You abused your position of authority to intimidate and humiliate someone you perceived as vulnerable. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a federal crime." Emma Sullivan's live stream had reached 250,000 viewers. Major news networks were now reaching out to her directly for licensing rights to the video. The story was breaking nationally in real time. The inspector is now explaining the federal consequences she narrated. "This is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Park continued documenting everything. As a medical professional who testified in court cases, he understood the importance of precise observation. Inspector Thompson is conducting himself with remarkable professionalism given the circumstances. Captain Matthews, on the other hand, is demonstrating classic signs of someone who's realized the magnitude of his mistake. Marcus reached for his phone and dialed a number. "This is Inspector Thompson, badge 4738. I'm initiating immediate safety compliance action on Skyward Airlines Flight 31E. I need Federal Aviation legal support and Department of Transportation civil rights liaison." He listened for a moment, then continued. "Yes, discrimination case. Multiple witnesses, recorded evidence, complete documentation. Priority-level federal intervention required." Matthews watched helplessly as Marcus spoke with federal authorities, each word sealing his fate more completely. When Marcus hung up, he turned back to Matthews. "Captain, Federal Aviation legal support is en route. Department of Transportation investigators are being dispatched. FAA Enforcement Division is opening a formal case file." "My union," Matthews said desperately. "I need to call my union representative." "You have that right," Marcus agreed. "But I should inform you that discriminatory conduct is specifically excluded from union protection under federal aviation regulations. Your union can provide legal counsel, but they cannot protect you from federal civil rights charges." Richard Hawthorne, who had been silent since the revelation, finally spoke up. "Look, Inspector, surely we can handle this reasonably. Captain Matthews is a good pilot with a long record. Maybe some additional training." Marcus turned to look at Hawthorne. "Sir, are you suggesting that federal civil rights violations should be resolved through additional training rather than legal accountability?" Hawthorne realized his mistake immediately. No, I didn't mean..." "Because that statement is also being recorded and will be included in the investigation file." Emma Sullivan's followers were going crazy in the comments. The rich guy just implicated himself, trying to minimize federal civil rights violations on live stream. "These people really think money buys them out of everything." Mrs. Foster finally spoke, her elderly voice carrying clearly across the cabin. "Young man," she said, addressing Marcus, "in my 78 years I've seen discrimination take many forms, but I've rarely seen it challenged so effectively. You've done something important here today." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am. But this isn't about me. It's about ensuring that every passenger is treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or where they come from." Matthews made one last desperate attempt. "Inspector Thompson, I have 28 years of flying experience. I have a clean safety record. This was a mistake in judgment, not what you're making it out to be." Marcus considered this for a moment. "Captain, let me ask you something. In those 28 years, how many other minority passengers have you questioned inappropriately? How many other people have you humiliated based on your assumptions about who belongs where? Matthew's silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," Marcus said quietly. "This wasn't a mistake, Captain. This was a pattern. And patterns of discrimination require institutional intervention, not personal apologies." The cabin fell silent again as the full weight of the situation settled over everyone. Captain Derek Matthews, who had started the day as a respected senior pilot, was now facing federal investigation, license suspension, and civil rights charges. All because he'd assumed a black man in first class must be committing fraud. Marcus Thompson sat back down in seat 2A and reopened his manual. "Captain, I suggest you contact your union representative and legal counsel. Federal investigators will want to interview you within the next few hours." Matthews stood there for another moment, looking around the cabin at the witnesses to his downfall before slowly walking back toward the cockpit. His career was over, and everyone knew it. But the real consequences were just beginning. The cockpit door closed behind Captain Matthews with a soft click that somehow sounded like a prison cell locking. Through the small window, passengers could see him slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, the weight of his destroyed career pressing down on his shoulders. Marcus Thompson returned to his Federal Aviation Regulations manual as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere in the cabin had changed completely. What had been a routine morning flight had become a documented federal case with witnesses, recordings, and evidence that would reshape how discrimination in aviation was prosecuted. Emma Sullivan's live stream had reached 400,000 viewers and was climbing. News outlets worldwide were now monitoring the feed, and her phone was buzzing with interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and international media. The hashtag Skyward Discrimination was trending in 17 countries. "I want to be clear about what we just witnessed," Emma said into her camera, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "A federal aviation inspector was discriminated against by an airline captain, and we watched it happen in real time. This isn't alleged discrimination. This isn't a he said, she said situation. This is documented, recorded witness discrimination against a federal law enforcement officer." The comments were pouring in faster than anyone could read. "This is going to change everything." That pilot just ended his own career. Federal inspector played the long game, justice in real time. "This is better than any movie." Dr. Park had filled several pages of notes and continued recording audio. As a surgeon who'd testified as an expert witness in multiple court cases, he understood the legal significance of what they'd witnessed. "This represents a perfect case study in institutional discrimination," he said quietly. "Clear documentation, multiple witnesses, federal authority, and recorded evidence. This will likely become precedent in civil rights law." Isabella Rodriguez stood in the galley, her hands shaking as she realized her 8-year career with Skyward Airlines had just taken a dramatic turn. She'd witnessed her captain commit federal crimes, and she'd chosen to testify against him. There would be consequences, but for the first time in years, she felt like she'd done the right thing. Katie Williams, the junior flight attendant, was experiencing a complete transformation in her understanding of corporate power structures. "Isabella," she whispered, "what happens now to us? I mean, to the airline?" Isabella looked around the cabin, taking in the passengers with their phones out. The federal inspector calmly reading his manual, the empty cockpit where their captain sat in ruins. "I think," she said slowly, "everything changes." Richard Hawthorne was frantically texting his lawyers. As a hedge fund manager who'd built his career on reading situations and managing risk, he understood that his recorded comments supporting discrimination could destroy his business. His wealthy clients didn't tolerate public relations disasters, especially ones involving federal civil rights violations. Mrs. Foster sat quietly, but her mind was active. At 78, she'd lived through the entire arc of American civil rights progress from segregation through integration to the present day. She'd seen moments like this before, moments when individual courage intersected with institutional accountability to create real change. "Young people today," she said to no one in particular, "they don't understand how important moments like this are. How many people suffered in silence before someone with authority was willing to stand up?" Marcus looked up from his manual and caught her eye. "Mrs. Foster. Eleanor Foster. Mrs. Foster. Would you be willing to provide a witness statement for the federal investigation? Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. I've seen enough discrimination in my life to recognize it immediately, and I've lived long enough to know how rare it is to see justice happening in real time. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and answered immediately. Inspector Thompson. The entire cabin fell silent, straining to hear his side of the conversation. Yes, sir. Complete documentation. Multiple witnesses. Live streamed to over 400,000 viewers. Yes, sir, I believe this represents the most comprehensive discrimination case we've developed. Immediate license suspension recommended. Full DOT civil rights investigation. Yes, sir, I'll remain on scene until federal support arrives. He hung up and looked around the cabin. That was the FAA regional administrator. Federal investigators are en route to Boston Logan. Department of Transportation civil rights investigators are being dispatched from Washington. This case is now a federal priority. Emma Sullivan nearly dropped her phone. A federal priority. What does that mean? Marcus considered how much to reveal. It means this case will be used as a model for how discrimination in aviation is investigated and prosecuted. It means the Department of Justice will likely file federal charges. And it means the airline industry is about to face new standards for passenger treatment. Isabella Rodriguez stepped forward. Inspector Thompson, what happens to the flight crew? To those of us who witnessed this, Ms. Rodriguez, you and Ms. Williams demonstrated professional integrity by documenting what you saw and speaking up for passenger rights. That will be noted in my report as exemplary conduct under difficult circumstances. Katie Williams felt a surge of pride. She'd stood up for what was right despite pressure from her captain. Her training had taught her to put passenger safety and rights first, and she'd done exactly that. Marcus continued. However, I should inform everyone that you'll all be interviewed by federal investigators. This is now a formal civil rights case, and your testimony will be crucial. Dr. Park raised his hand. Inspector, as a medical professional, I'm familiar with federal investigation procedures. Will we need legal representation? Not unless you were complicit in the discrimination. For witnesses who documented civil rights violations, the government typically provides legal support to ensure your testimony is protected. Richard Hawthorne's face had gone completely pale. What if someone made comments supporting the captain before they knew? Marcus looked at him directly. Mr. Hawthorne, federal investigators will review all recorded evidence, including social media comments and passenger statements. If you made discriminatory comments supporting Captain Matthews's actions, that becomes part of the investigation record. Emma Sullivan's live stream exploded with comments about Hawthorne's obvious panic. Rich guy just realized he's caught. Money can't buy you out of federal civil rights charges. He really thought he could support discrimination with no consequences. The plane's PA system crackled to life. It was First Officer James Rodriguez, Isabella's cousin, who had been in the cockpit during the entire incident. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Rodriguez. Due to a federal investigation in progress, this flight has been officially grounded pending arrival of federal authorities. Passengers will be accommodated on alternative flights, and Skyward Airlines will cover all expenses related to this delay. Marcus made another call. This is Inspector Thompson. I need immediate communication with Skyward Airlines corporate leadership. Yes, CEO level. Federal discrimination case involving one of their captains. Media coverage already global. Yes, they need to respond immediately. Within 10 minutes, Marcus's phone rang. Inspector Thompson. This is Patricia Blackwood, CEO of Skyward Airlines. I understand we have a serious situation. Ms. Blackwood, one of your senior captains, has committed multiple federal civil rights violations against a paying passenger. The incident was live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of viewers and documented by multiple witnesses. I'm reviewing the social media coverage now. Inspector, what does Skyward need to do to address this situation? Full cooperation with federal investigation. Immediate suspension of Captain Matthews pending legal resolution. Complete review of your passenger treatment protocols. and a public statement acknowledging what happened and committing to institutional change. Consider it done. Inspector, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced on our aircraft. This does not represent Skyward Airlines' values. Ms. Blackwood, I appreciate the apology, but this incident reveals institutional problems that go beyond one pilot. Federal investigators will want to review your complaint history training protocols and response procedures for discrimination cases. Emma Sullivan's followers were now over 600,000, with major news networks picking up the story globally. The incident was becoming a landmark case in aviation civil rights watched by millions of people worldwide. Marcus hung up and addressed the cabin. Skyward Airlines CEO has been notified. Captain Matthews is being immediately suspended. Federal investigators should arrive within the hour. Mrs. Foster raised her hand. Inspector Thompson, I have a question. Will this case actually change anything, or will it just be quietly settled like so many others? Marcus smiled for the first time since the incident began. Mrs. Foster, that's exactly the right question. And I can tell you that because this case was documented so thoroughly with so many witnesses and broadcast to so many people, it can't be quietly settled. This becomes a public record that changes how aviation discrimination is prosecuted nationwide. Isabella Rodriguez felt something shift inside her. After 8 years of staying quiet, of accepting the status quo, of watching discrimination happen without consequence, she was finally part of something that would create real change. Inspector, she said, I want to do more than just testify. I want to help make sure this never happens again to any passenger on any airline. Marcus nodded. Ms. Rodriguez, federal investigators will want to interview flight attendants across the industry about discrimination they've witnessed. Your voice will be important in shaping new protocols. The cabin fell quiet as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what they'd witnessed and participated in. Captain Derek Matthews had started the day as a respected senior pilot. He was ending it as the face of aviation discrimination facing federal charges and national scrutiny. But more importantly, the passengers and crew who'd witnessed his downfall were becoming the foundation for institutional change that would protect future travelers from similar treatment. Justice wasn't just being served. Justice was being documented, broadcast, and transformed into lasting reform. And everyone in first class had played a part in making it happen. Federal investigators arrived at Boston Logan Airport exactly 47 minutes after Marcus Thompson's call. The response team included 2 FBI civil rights specialists, 3 Department of Transportation investigators, 2 FAA enforcement officers, and a Justice Department liaison. They moved with the efficiency of people who understood that high-profile discrimination cases required immediate visible action. Agent Sarah Martinez, the FBI's lead civil rights investigator for the Northeast region, boarded Flight 318 with her credentials clearly displayed. At 38, she'd prosecuted dozens of civil rights cases and understood the importance of thorough documentation in the critical first hours after an incident. Inspector Thompson, she said, approaching Seat 2A with professional courtesy. I'm Agent Martinez, FBI Civil Rights Division. I understand we have a federal case here. Marcus stood and shook her hand. Agent Martinez, complete documentation, multiple witnesses live-streamed to over 600,000 viewers. The evidence is comprehensive. Agent Martinez looked around the cabin, taking in the passengers with their phones still out. The flight attendants standing nervously by the galley and the closed cockpit door where Captain Matthews waited in ruins. Has the subject been advised of his rights? Not yet. I wanted federal law enforcement to handle that portion of the investigation. Appropriate. Agent Martinez turned to address the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI Civil Rights Division. What happened on this aircraft today is being investigated as a federal civil rights violation. Each of you will be interviewed as witnesses, and your cooperation is appreciated. Emma Sullivan's live stream had reached 800,000 viewers. News vans were arriving at the airport. International media were requesting interviews. The hashtag Skyward Discrimination was trending in 23 countries. Federal investigators are now on the aircraft, Emma narrated quietly. This is officially a federal civil rights case. We're witnessing history. Dr. Park approached Agent Martinez. Agent, I'm Dr. David Park. I documented the entire incident in writing and audio recording. I'm prepared to provide complete witness testimony. Dr. Park. Thank you. Your documentation will be crucial. We'll need a formal statement within the hour. Mrs. Foster raised her hand. Agent Martinez. I'm Eleanor Foster. I witnessed clear discrimination based on race. I'm 78 years old and I've seen this before, but I've never seen it handled so professionally by the victim. Agent Martinez nodded. Mrs. Foster, your witness perspective will be valuable. Federal civil rights cases depend on credible witness testimony. Isabella Rodriguez stepped forward, her hands no longer shaking. Agent Martinez. I'm Isabella Rodriguez, lead flight attendant. I witnessed my captain discriminate against Mr. Thompson. I want to testify fully about what I saw, Miss. Rodriguez's flight crew testimony is particularly important because you understand normal airline procedures. Your statement will help establish that this was discrimination, not legitimate security screening. Katie Williams joined Isabella. I'm Katie Williams, junior flight attendant. I also witnessed the discrimination and want to testify. Captain Matthews threatened to fire me for defending the passengers' rights. Agent Martinez made notes. Ms. Williams' retaliation against crew members for protecting passenger rights is itself a federal violation. Your testimony will be crucial. Richard Hawthorne tried to slip toward the back of the cabin, but Agent Martinez's trained eye caught the movement. Sir, you're also a witness. I'll need to speak with you as well. Hawthorne's face went ashen. I really don't have anything to add. I wasn't paying attention. Emma Sullivan's followers were commenting rapidly. The rich guy is trying to escape. Too late, buddy. You're on federal livestream. Agent just caught him trying to sneak away. Agent Martinez consulted her notes. Mr. Hawthorne, according to witness statements, you made comments supporting the captain's discriminatory actions. That makes you a key witness, potentially a co-participant. Co-participant. Hawthorne's voice cracked. I didn't realize. Sir, federal civil rights law holds that those who encourage or support discriminatory actions can be held accountable as participants in the violation. Marcus watched the investigation unfold with professional satisfaction. This was exactly why he conducted unannounced audits. When discrimination happened spontaneously without preparation or legal coaching, it revealed the true attitudes and institutional biases that could otherwise remain hidden. His phone rang again. The caller ID showed FAA Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Inspector Thompson. Marcus, this is Administrator Johnson. I'm watching the media coverage from here. Outstanding work. This case is going to change how we handle aviation discrimination nationwide. Thank you, sir. The evidence is comprehensive. Multiple witnesses, complete documentation, viral social media coverage. This should be prosecution ready within days. Marcus, I'm recommending you for the Administrator's Award for Excellence in Civil Rights Enforcement. But more importantly, I'm authorizing you to lead a new task force on aviation discrimination. This case proves we need institutional change across the industry. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. Not personal vindication, but professional accomplishment. This was why he'd joined the FAA to create real change that protected all passengers. I accept, sir. When do we start? Immediately. The Department of Transportation is fast-tracking new regulations based on your findings. Congress is already asking questions. This case is going to have national impact. Agent Martinez approached the cockpit door and knocked firmly. Captain Matthews, this is Agent Martinez, FBI Civil Rights Division. I need to speak with you immediately. The door opened slowly and Captain Derek Matthews emerged looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 hours. His uniform was rumpled, his face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "Captain Derek Matthews," Agent Martinez said formally, "you are under federal investigation for civil rights violations, under 18 U.S.C. Section 245, deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court." The Miranda rights reading was broadcast live to nearly 1 million viewers worldwide. Emma Sullivan's followers were witnessing a federal arrest in real time. "This is unprecedented," Emma whispered into her camera. A commercial airline captain being read his rights for discriminating against a passenger. "I've never seen anything like this." Matthews looked around the cabin, desperately seeking some escape from his nightmare. But everywhere he looked, he saw witnesses to his discrimination. Federal investigators documenting his crimes and phones recording his downfall. "I want a lawyer," he said quietly. "That's your right, Captain. You're being transported to federal detention pending formal charges. Your pilot's license is immediately suspended pending investigation outcome." 2 FBI agents escorted Matthews off the aircraft in handcuffs. The image of a senior airline captain being arrested for discrimination was captured by dozens of passengers and broadcast globally within minutes. Agent Martinez turned back to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, formal interviews will begin immediately. Your cooperation in this federal investigation is appreciated and will help ensure justice is served." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Zoe. "Dad, you're all over social media. You did something amazing today. I'm proud of you." He smiled and texted back, "Justice isn't about punishment, sweetheart. It's about protection, making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Within 3 hours, the consequences had cascaded beyond anyone's expectations. Skyward Airlines CEO Patricia Blackwood held an emergency press conference announcing Captain Matthews' immediate termination implementation of new anti-discrimination training and creation of a passenger rights oversight board. The FAA announced new federal regulations requiring real-time reporting of discrimination complaints and mandatory federal investigation of pattern violations. The Department of Justice confirmed they would prosecute the case as a landmark civil rights violation. Matthews Union, the Airline Pilots Association, issued a statement condemning discrimination and announcing they would not defend civil rights violations. International aviation authorities reached out to request training on the Thompson Protocol for investigating discrimination. Emma Sullivan's live stream had become the most watched civil rights documentation in social media history, with over 1.5 million viewers and coverage in 47 countries. By evening, Captain Derek Matthews was in federal custody facing charges that carried potential prison time and guaranteed career destruction. His pilot's license was revoked, his airline pension was under review, and his name had become synonymous with aviation discrimination. But the real victory wasn't Matthews' downfall. It was the institutional change that began immediately. Isabella Rodriguez received a call from Skyward Airlines headquarters, offering her a promotion to Director of Passenger Rights Training. Katie Williams was offered a full scholarship to complete her aviation management degree. Dr. Park was invited to join a federal advisory committee on transportation discrimination. Mrs. Foster became an overnight spokesperson for senior passengers' rights, giving interviews about the importance of speaking up when witnessing discrimination. Even Richard Hawthorne, facing potential federal charges for supporting discriminatory actions, announced he would donate $1 million to civil rights organizations as acknowledgement of his poor judgment. Marcus Thompson sat in the airport hotel that evening writing his federal investigation report. But more importantly, he was drafting the framework for new aviation civil rights protocols that would protect every passenger who flew in American airspace. His daughter Zoe called as he finished writing. "Dad, I watched the news coverage. You changed everything today." "No, sweetheart. Marcus replied, looking out at the airport where planes continued to arrive and depart carrying passengers who would now be protected by new standards his investigation had created. We all changed everything. Every witness who spoke up, every person who refused to stay silent, every voice that demanded justice. Is this what you meant when you said your job was about protection? Marcus smiled. Exactly what I meant. Today we protected everyone who flies from being treated the way I was treated. That's worth more than any punishment we could give to one discriminatory pilot. Justice wasn't just served on Flight 318. Justice was institutionalized, documented, and transformed into lasting protection for every passenger who would ever board an aircraft in the United States. And it all started with a federal inspector who refused to accept that being black meant he didn't belong in first class. 6 months after the incident on Flight 318, Marcus Thompson stood before a joint session of the House Transportation and Senate Commerce Committees delivering testimony that would reshape aviation civil rights enforcement for generations. Senators, representatives. He began his voice carrying the same calm authority that had confronted Captain Matthews. The incident involving Skyward Airlines was not an aberration. It was a symptom of institutional failures that have allowed discrimination to flourish in commercial aviation for decades. Behind him, a large screen displayed statistics that shocked the lawmakers over 847 discrimination complaints filed with the Department of Transportation in the previous year, with resolution rates below 12%. The Thompson Protocol, implemented after his viral confrontation, had already prevented 847 additional incidents through real-time intervention and mandatory federal investigation procedures. Committee Chairwoman Senator Patricia Williams leaned into her microphone. Inspector Thompson, how has the aviation industry responded to the new federal requirements? Marcus clicked to his next slide showing dramatic improvements across all major carriers. Senator, compliance has been remarkable. When discrimination carries immediate federal consequences, airline behavior changes rapidly. We're seeing 89% reduction in discrimination complaints, 94% improvement in passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers, and zero-tolerance policies implemented across the industry. Representative James Martinez raised his hand. Inspector, what about international implementation? Are other countries adopting the Thompson Protocol? Representative Martinez, 23 nations have requested training on our discrimination investigation procedures. The International Civil Aviation Organization has adopted our framework as the global standard. American aviation civil rights enforcement is now the world model. The hearing was being broadcast live on C-SPAN with Emma Sullivan, providing commentary for her 2.3 million social media followers. She'd parlayed her Flight 318 documentation into a successful career as a civil rights advocate and media commentator. What we're seeing today, Emma told her audience, is how one moment of courage can transform entire industries. Inspector Thompson didn't just confront one discriminatory pilot. He created the framework for protecting every passenger worldwide. The institutional changes had been swift and comprehensive. Within 90 days of the incident, new federal regulations required every commercial flight to have real-time discrimination reporting capability with direct connection to federal investigators. Mandatory quarterly bias training for all airline personnel with federal oversight and testing requirements. Zero-tolerance policies for discrimination with automatic federal investigation for any violation. Passenger Bill of Rights posted in every cabin in multiple languages with federal enforcement contact information. Anonymous reporting tools with federal protection for whistleblowers and witnesses. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Passenger confidence in air travel had increased dramatically, particularly among minority travelers who had previously avoided flying due to discrimination concerns. Airlines initially resistant to the changes discovered that treating all passengers with dignity actually improved their bottom line. Skyward Airlines, under CEO Patricia Blackwood's leadership, had become the industry model for transformation. Isabella Rodriguez, now Director of Civil Rights Training, had developed programs adopted by airlines worldwide. The key insight, Isabella explained to a conference of airline executives, was that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically destructive. When passengers feel safe and welcome, they fly more often, recommend airlines to others, and create positive word of mouth that money can't buy. Katie Williams had completed her aviation management degree and was now Assistant Director of the FAA's new Passenger Rights Enforcement Division. Her youth and idealism, combined with her first-hand experience witnessing discrimination, made her an effective advocate for institutional change. Dr. Park had joined the Department of Transportation as Chief Medical Advisor for passenger rights, helping design policies that protected travelers with disabilities, medical conditions, and other vulnerabilities from discriminatory treatment. Mrs. Foster, at 78, had become an unlikely civil rights icon. Her witness testimony had been so compelling that she was now a regular speaker at senior centers, encouraging elderly Americans to speak up when they witnessed discrimination. Young people think civil rights is ancient history, she told audiences across the country. But I witnessed federal justice happening in real time on an airplane. The fight for dignity continues every day, and every voice matters. Even Richard Hawthorne had undergone a transformation. Facing potential federal charges for supporting discriminatory behavior, he'd agreed to a plea arrangement that required him to fund civil rights education programs and complete 500 hours of community service at organizations serving minority communities. I learned, he said in a magazine interview, that wealth and privilege don't protect you from being wrong. And being wrong about civil rights has consequences that money can't fix. The Thompson Centers, established at major airports nationwide, provided immediate intervention for discrimination complaints. Staffed by federal investigators with real-time authority to address violations, they'd resolved over 200 cases in their first 6 months of operation. Marcus himself had been promoted to Deputy Administrator for Civil Rights Enforcement, overseeing implementation of new policies across all transportation sectors, airlines, trains, buses, and ride-sharing services. His daughter Zoe, now a freshman at Harvard Law School, was writing her thesis on federal authority and corporate accountability, how the Thompson Protocol transformed transportation civil rights. She'd been inspired by her father's courage to pursue a career in civil rights law. Dad didn't just stand up for himself that day, she explained to her study group. He stood up for every passenger who'd ever been made to feel they didn't belong. That's what real leadership looks like. The international impact had been equally significant. The European Union had adopted modified Thompson Protocol procedures for their aviation industry. Asian countries were implementing similar standards. African nations were using the framework to address discrimination in their developing aviation sectors. Captain Derek Matthews, meanwhile, had served 18 months in federal prison and was now working as a baggage handler at a regional airport in Nebraska. His pilot's license had been permanently revoked, his airline pension had been forfeited, and his name had become a cautionary tale taught in aviation schools worldwide. But the real measure of success wasn't Matthews' punishment. It was the protection now afforded to every passenger who boarded an aircraft anywhere in the United States. The annual Thompson Report, issued by the Department of Transportation, documented continued progress. Discrimination complaints down 78% from pre-protocol levels. Passenger satisfaction among minority travelers up 85%. International recognition of U.S. aviation civil rights leadership. 0 instances of captain-initiated passenger discrimination since protocol implementation. Industry-wide adoption of dignity-first passenger service principles. Marcus stood in his office in Washington, D.C., looking out at Ronald Reagan National Airport, where diverse travelers moved freely through terminals designed to welcome everyone equally. His work had created a foundation of protection that would outlast any individual career or administration. His phone rang. Inspector Thompson. This is Secretary Rodriguez from the Department of Transportation. The President would like to see you next week. He's considering nominating you for a new position, Director of National Transportation Civil Rights. Marcus smiled. "I'd be honored, Madam Secretary. Inspector, your work has transformed how America thinks about civil rights in transportation. The President wants to expand that model to all federal agencies." After hanging up, Marcus reflected on the journey from that morning on Flight 318 to this moment. One instance of courage supported by witnesses willing to speak up had created protections for millions of travelers. But the most important change wasn't in policy or procedure. It was in understanding. The incident had demonstrated that discrimination wasn't just a relic of the past. It was an ongoing challenge that required ongoing vigilance. And when good people stood up, spoke out, and demanded justice, the entire framework could change quickly and permanently. Emma Sullivan, now covering civil rights issues for major networks, often reminded her audience of the deeper lesson. The Thompson Protocol didn't just protect passengers from discrimination. It proved that individual courage combined with institutional authority and public witness can transform entire frameworks overnight. The legacy of Flight 318 wasn't about one discriminatory pilot being held accountable. It was about creating a world where no passenger would ever again be told they didn't belong in a seat they'd paid for. And that legacy would protect travelers for generations to come. 1 year to the day after the incident on Flight 318, Marcus Thompson boarded the exact same flight Boston to Miami, Skyward Airlines Seat 2A. But everything else had changed. Captain Maria Vasquez, the first Latina captain on the Boston-Miami route, personally greeted him as he boarded. "Welcome aboard, Inspector Thompson. It's an honor to have you fly with us." Isabella Rodriguez, now Chief Training Officer for Skyward Airlines, supervised a diverse crew that had been trained in the new Thompson Protocol standards. Every flight attendant understood that passenger dignity was their primary responsibility, even before safety demonstrations. Emma Sullivan, covering the anniversary flight for national media, documented the transformation with the same phone that had broadcast the original discrimination to the world. "This is what justice looks like," she told her 3.2 million followers. "Not just punishment for wrongdoing, but institutional change that prevents future victims." The first-class cabin was filled with diverse passengers, all treated with equal dignity and respect. Where Captain Matthews had once seen threats and problems, Captain Vasquez saw valued customers deserving of professional service. In the seat where Richard Hawthorne had once supported discrimination, Dr. Park now served as a federal advisory board member, continuing his work to protect passengers' rights. Mrs. Foster occupied her usual seat, now recognized as a civil rights advocate who'd helped change aviation history. As the plane lifted off from Boston, Logan Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from victim of discrimination to architect of institutional change. His work had protected millions of travelers, but the personal transformation was equally significant. His daughter Zoe had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School and was now clerking for the Supreme Court, inspired by her father's demonstration that federal authority could be used to protect the vulnerable rather than perpetuate injustice. "Dad," she'd said at her graduation, "you taught me that power isn't about authority over others. It's about using whatever platform you have to ensure everyone is treated with dignity." Marcus had carried that lesson into his new role as Director of National Transportation Civil Rights, where the Thompson Protocol was being expanded beyond aviation to all forms of public transportation. Trains, buses, rideshare services, and even taxi companies now operated under federal civil rights oversight that prevented discriminatory treatment. The statistics were compelling, but the human stories were more important. Thousands of passengers had written to thank Marcus for creating a travel environment where they felt safe and welcome. Minority families were taking vacations they'd previously avoided. Business travelers no longer worried about being humiliated based on their appearance. Captain Derek Matthews had completed his federal sentence and was now working for a nonprofit organization that provided job training for formerly incarcerated individuals. His mandatory community service had evolved into genuine commitment to civil rights advocacy. I spent 28 years believing that some people didn't belong in certain places, Matthews said in a documentary about aviation discrimination. Inspector Thompson taught me that the only person who didn't belong was someone who treated others with disrespect. The transformation hadn't been limited to aviation. The Thompson Protocol had become a model for addressing discrimination in housing, employment, education, and healthcare. Federal agencies across government had adopted similar rapid response mechanisms for civil rights violations. International impact had been equally significant. The United Nations had requested Marcus to lead a global task force on transportation discrimination. Countries worldwide were implementing Thompson Protocol standards, creating an international network of civil rights protection for travelers. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. A generation of young Americans had grown up seeing discrimination challenged immediately and effectively. The viral footage of Marcus confronting Captain Matthews was taught in schools as an example of how individual courage could create institutional change. The lesson of Flight 318. Marcus often told audiences, isn't that discrimination can be prevented by perfect policies. It's that discrimination must be confronted by real people willing to speak truth to power. As the anniversary flight descended toward Miami, Marcus received a text from Administrator Johnson. Marcus, the President is announcing the National Civil Rights Medal ceremony next week. You're the first recipient. Congratulations on changing America. Marcus smiled and showed the text to Isabella Rodriguez, who was conducting the safety demonstration with the professionalism that had helped her rise from flight attendant to corporate trainer. Inspector, she said, you know what the real victory is. It's not awards or recognition. It's that passengers don't have to be afraid anymore. They don't have to wonder if they'll be humiliated for their skin color or discriminated against for their appearance. They can just travel. The plane touched down in Miami smoothly, and Marcus gathered his belongings. The same weathered briefcase, the same federal regulations manual, the same calm presence that had confronted discrimination and emerged victorious. But now those tools served a different purpose. Instead of documenting discrimination, they prevented it. Instead of investigating violations, they created protections. Instead of reacting to injustice, they built frameworks that promoted dignity for everyone. As passengers deplaned, many stopped to shake Marcus's hand or take photos with the man who'd transformed their travel experience. Children pointed him out to their parents. That's Inspector Thompson. He's the one who made flying fair for everyone. Marcus Thompson walked through Miami International Airport, past Thompson Centers, staffed with federal investigators, under signs posting passenger rights in multiple languages through terminals designed to welcome travelers of every background. He'd started his career investigating individual cases of discrimination. He was ending it having created institutional protections that would outlast any single case or career. Justice wasn't about revenge or punishment. Justice was about creating a world where everyone belonged, where dignity was protected, and where power served people rather than prejudice. And as Marcus walked toward his connecting flight, another routine trip on another American airline now bound by Thompson Protocol standards, he knew that his promise had been kept. No one would ever again be dismissed or diminished for the way they looked or where they came from. The sky belonged to everyone now, and that was the only legacy that mattered. If you've witnessed discrimination or been treated unfairly because of who you are, your voice matters. If you've stayed silent when others were being mistreated, you have the power to speak up. And if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, share this story because change happens when good people refuse to accept injustice. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to stay humble and treat others with respect. Because in a world where discrimination still exists, every voice raised for justice makes the framework a little more fair for everyone. Justice isn't about having a badge or federal authority. Justice is about having the courage to say this is wrong when it matters most, and that power belongs to all of us. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss these powerful stories of real people creating real change. Together, we can build a world where everyone belongs.